Everyone ignored the billionaire's deaf mother, until a poor waitress did the unthinkable. She broke the rules to speak her language, but what she said left everyone in tears. "Hi, guys. It's your favorite bestie, the storyteller. Before we start this beautiful story I've arranged for you, please tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Subscribe, like, and share, as this act of kindness really means a lot to us. Now, let's get the story rolling." The Grand Hotel was a place of polished marble and hushed whispers, a world where the carpet was so thick it swallowed the sound of footsteps. For the guests, this was luxury, a sanctuary where their money purchased not just comfort, but a separation from the chaotic world outside. For Anna, it was a daily reminder of everything she didn't have. Anna was 24, with skin the color of deep mahogany and eyes that always seemed to be looking at the floor. She had worked at the Grand for barely 2 weeks, moving like a ghost among the wealthy patrons. She cleared plates, folded linen napkins into sharp swans, and poured sparkling water into crystal glasses, trying her best to remain invisible. In a place like this, the staff were treated like furniture, necessary for the function of the room, but ultimately unnoticed. She preferred it that way. Silence was safer. The uniform helped. It was a crisp, starched white shirt and black trousers that seemed to erase her individuality. When she put on, she ceased to be Anna, the girl who lived in a cramped apartment with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that rattled through the night. Here, she was just Waitress. She had learned quickly that the guests didn't want to see her. They wanted their needs met before they even realized they had them. "More coffee," a man in a gray suit would say without looking up from his newspaper, extending his cup into the air. Anna would fill it, her hand steady, and retreat before the steam had even settled. "Clear this." A woman dripping in gold jewelry would gesture vaguely at a half-eaten salad. Anna would whisk it away, a silent phantom in the periphery of their important lives. But Anna's silence wasn't just a professional requirement. It was a personal fortress. She had built it brick by brick over the last 2 years. Outside the hotel, the city was loud. Horns honking, music blaring from passing cars, people shouting to be heard. But inside Anna, there was a vast, echoing quiet. It was the space where her brother, Ben, used to be. Ben had been born deaf, and for 12 years, Anna had been his voice, just as he had been her heart. Their home had been a sanctuary of hand signs and expressive faces, a world where they didn't need sound to understand each other perfectly. But since the sickness took him, the silence had changed. It was no longer a shared language. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Working at the Grand suited her grief. The hotel demanded silence, and Anna had plenty to give. She moved through the dining hall, a tray balanced on her shoulder, watching the way the light hit the chandeliers. She saw the guests talking, laughing, and arguing, their words filling the air, yet saying so little. They took their ability to hear and speak for granted, treating communication as something cheap and disposable. Anna tightened her grip on the tray. She missed the meaningful silence of sign language. She missed the way Ben's eyes would light up when she signed a joke, or the way he would sign, "I love you," before bed. Here, amidst the clinking of silver and the murmur of business deals, she felt more alone than ever. She was surrounded by people, yet she was completely, utterly by herself. She checked her watch. It was nearing the lunch rush. The manager, a stern man named Mr. Henderson, was already pacing by the entrance, checking the reservation list. Rumors were flying in the kitchen about a VIP guest arriving today. Someone important, someone difficult. Anna adjusted her apron, took a deep breath, and prepared to disappear once again into the background, unaware that the silence she held so tightly was about to be broken. As the buzz of the dining room began to rise with the lunch rush, Anna's mind drifted away from the polished silverware and back to the source of her quiet nature. Anna's silence wasn't born of shyness, nor was it merely a reaction to the intimidating grandeur of the Grand Hotel. It was a habit, etched into her bones over a lifetime. She grew up in a small, noisy apartment where the walls were paper-thin, vibrating with the sounds of neighbors arguing, televisions blaring, and the constant wail of city sirens. But her heart had always lived in a quiet room at the back of that chaotic apartment, where her younger brother, Ben, used to sleep. Ben was born deaf. While the world outside honked and shouted, striving to be the loudest thing in existence. Ben's world was peaceful, untouched by the cacophony. To speak to him, to truly know him, Anna had learned sign language. She was 12 when he was born, and by the time he was a toddler, she had become his bridge to the world. It became their secret code, a dance of fingers and expressions that said more than spoken words ever could. In the evenings, while their mother worked double shifts to keep the lights on, Anna and Ben would sit on the floor of his room. They didn't need to shout to be heard. A raised eyebrow, a flick of the wrist, a touch to the chin. These were their inside jokes, their dreams and their stories. They created a bubble where sound didn't matter, where connection was visual and visceral. In that silence, Anna felt loudest. She felt seen in a way she never was at school or on the streets. But the house was too quiet now. The silence that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a vacuum. Ben had passed away 2 years ago, just weeks after his 10th birthday. It was a simple infection that had complicated into pneumonia, an illness that money and proper insurance might have treated with ease. But poverty could not. Anna remembered the long waits. At the free clinics, the dismissive doctors who were too overworked to look closely, and the crushing realization that their love wasn't enough to buy his health. Since then, Anna's hands fell heavy, as if they were lead weights at her sides. They had forgotten how to speak the language of love because there was no one left to listen. Every time she adjusted her apron or poured water at the hotel, she felt a phantom ache in her fingers, a muscle memory of a language that was slowly dying within her. Standing near the kitchen doors, Anna shook her head slightly to clear the memories. She couldn't afford to cry here. Mr. Henderson was signaling for the staff to line up. The VIPs were arriving. Anna swallowed the lump in her throat, locking the memory of Ben back into the quiet room of her mind. She forced her face into a mask of professional neutrality, unaware that the ghost of that secret code was about to be the only thing that could save her. While Anna stood bracing herself in the service station of the Grand Hotel, a sleek black sedan glided silently through the chaotic city streets, heading toward the very entrance she was dreading. Inside the climate-controlled cabin, David Cole adjusted his silk tie in the rear-view mirror. He was a striking man, with dark skin and a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled from granite. As one of the country's most successful businessmen, David was known for being brilliant, sharp, and famously cold. He had built skyscrapers that scraped the clouds and acquired companies with ruthless efficiency. But for all his structural engineering knowledge, he struggled to build bridges to the people closest to him. Beside him sat his mother, Rose. She was 70, a vision of elegance in a tailored navy dress, a wide-brimmed Sunday hat, and a string of authentic pearls resting against her collarbone. She held her purse in her lap, her hands clasped tightly together. To the outside observer, she was the matriarch of an empire, but closer inspection revealed a profound sadness in her eyes. Rose had lost her hearing 10 years ago. It hadn't been a sudden event, but a cruel, gradual fade into silence. It started with missing the punchlines of jokes, then the ringing of the telephone, until finally, the world became a moving picture with the volume turned down. The vibrant, chatty woman who had raised David on songs and stories had retreated inward, leaving behind a shell of polite smiles and confusion. David loved her fiercely. She was the only person in the world he truly cared for, but he didn't know how to handle her new world. He treated her deafness like a business crisis, something to be managed, mitigated, and controlled. He protected her with his wealth, booking private rooms and hiring drivers, shielding her from the embarrassed glances of strangers who didn't have the patience to repeat themselves. "We're almost there, Mother," David said, his voice loud and overly enunciated, a habit he picked up that did little to help her understand. Rose didn't react. She was staring out the tinted window, watching the city blur by. She couldn't hear him, and because he was looking at his phone rather than facing her, she couldn't read his lips. David sighed, tapping out a final email on his phone. He convinced himself that this control was kindness. By ordering for her at restaurants, he saved her the struggle of communicating with waiters. By steering conversations away from her, he saved her the humiliation of misunderstanding. But in doing so, he had unknowingly walled her off from life itself. He had placed her in a gilded cage of silence where she was safe but utterly alone. The car slowed to a halt in front of the Grand Hotel. The doorman rushed to open the door. David stepped out first, buttoning his jacket, his face setting into the hard, impenetrable mask he wore for the public. He reached a hand back for Rose. She took it, her grip frail. As she stepped onto the curb, she looked up at the looming hotel, a place of noise and chatter she could no longer join, and prepared herself for another hour of smiling at people she couldn't hear, in a world that had stopped trying to speak to her. The heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open to admit the new arrivals, and the atmosphere in the restaurant seemed to shift instantly. The air grew tighter, charged with a sudden, nervous energy. Inside the service station, Mr. Henderson, the floor manager, was tapping his tablet with frantic intensity. He looked up, his eyes scanning the staff before landing on one person he knew would be quiet enough not to cause a scene. "Table 9 is yours today, Anna," Mr. Henderson snapped, shoving a digital tablet into her hands. "VIPs. Don't mess it up. It's David Cole." Anna's stomach tightened into a hard knot. She nearly dropped the device. Everyone knew the name David Cole. He wasn't just a guest. He was a walking performance review. Stories circulated in the break room about him. How he once had a waiter fired for pouring water too loudly during a business meeting, or how he tipped generously but never looked the staff in the eye. He was known for zero tolerance for mistakes, demanding an efficiency that bordered on robotic. Is there anything specific he needs?" Anna stammered, clutching the tablet against her chest like a shield. "Speed," Henderson replied, already turning away to bark orders at a busboy. "Speed and silence. He's with his mother. Just keep the glasses full and the questions to a minimum." Anna smoothed her apron, her hands trembling slightly against the starch-white fabric. She took a moment to steady her breathing, employing the same calming techniques she used to use. "When Ben was in the hospital, inhale, exhale. You are invisible," she told herself. "Just be furniture." She made her way across the plush carpet toward Table 9, a private alcove situated near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. It was the best seat in the house, offering privacy and a view, but as Anne approached, the mood at the table felt anything but luxurious. It felt desolate. David Cole was seated with his back to the room, his posture rigid, true to his reputation. He was already engrossed in his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen as he typed furiously, seemingly conducting a merger between the appetizer and the main course. He radiated a do-not-disturb energy that was almost palpable. Opposite him sat Rose. The contrast was heartbreaking. While David was hyper-connected to the digital world, Rose was completely disconnected from the physical one. She stared out the window, watching the traffic below, her face a blank mask of resignation. As Anna paused at the waiter's station a few feet away to observe, she saw the sommelier approach the table. The young man leaned in toward Rose, holding a wine list, and asked her a question. Rose didn't flinch. She didn't even know he was there. The sommelier paused, looking confused, and tried again, louder this time. "Madam, would you care to see the—" "She's not drinking." David cut in sharply, not looking up from his phone. "And I'll have the sparkling water. San Pellegrino. No ice." The sommelier flushed red, nodded quickly to David's profile, and retreated with a look of relief. Rose, sensing the movement, turned her head just as the man walked away. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. She looked at David, hoping for an explanation, but he was still typing. She adjusted her pearls, shrank a little further into her chair, and turned back to the window. Anna watched it all, her heart aching. She recognized that look on Rose's face. It wasn't rudeness. It was the exhaustion of living behind a glass wall. She realized then that this wasn't just a VIP table. It was a lonely island in a sea of noise. Taking a steadying breath, Anna stepped out of the shadows. Anna paused a few feet away from the table, tray balanced on her hand, observing the scene before she made her move. She needed to understand the rhythm of the table, but what she found was a jagged disconnect. A junior waiter, who had been tasked with taking the appetizer order, was standing awkwardly by Rose's elbow. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking helpless. He had asked a question, perhaps about dietary restrictions, and was met with silence. Rose leaned forward slightly, her brow furrowed in concentration, but she said nothing. She looked toward her son for help, but he was miles away in the digital world. The waiter opened his mouth to speak louder, a common mistake people made, assuming volume could bridge the gap of comprehension. But before he could shout, David intervened. "She'll have the soup," David said without looking up from his phone, answering for his mother with a tone of finalized efficiency. "And the garden salad, dressing on the side." The waiter nodded, relieved to have an instruction, and scurried away. But Anna didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on Rose. Rose shrank back slightly into the plush velvet of her chair. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible to anyone who hadn't spent a lifetime studying the body language of silence, but to Anna, it screamed of defeat. She saw the subtle flinch in Rose's shoulders, the physical reaction to having her agency stripped away. It wasn't that David was being malicious. He thought he was being helpful. He thought he was saving her the trouble. But in reality, he was erasing her. Anna watched Rose's face closely. She saw the way Rose's eyes scanned the retreating waiter's lips, and then David's, trying desperately to catch a familiar shape, a word, anything to tether her to the conversation. It was a frantic, hungry look, a desire to be part of the world that was moving so fast around her. Then the light from the chandelier caught a small glint behind Rose's ear. Anna saw the beige curve of a hearing aid, discreet and tucked away, but unmistakably there. Anna's breath hitched. It was a look she knew well. It was the same look Ben used to have when the other kids played games he couldn't understand. She remembered taking Ben to the park. When he was 7, he had stood on the edge of the sandbox, watching a group of boys shouting rules for a game of tag. Ben had watched their mouths, his little hands gripping the fence, his eyes wide with the effort to try and decode the chaos. He wanted to play so bad it hurt, but the barrier of sound was too high to climb. Eventually, he had just sat down in the dirt, alone, and resigned himself to watching. Rose had that same look now. She was an elegant woman in a $1 billion hotel, surrounded by people, yet she was that little boy in the sandbox. She was alone in a crowd. The realization hit Anna with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a difficult table. This was a woman drowning in silence, and the only person who could throw her a line was too busy checking his stocks to notice. Anna tightened her grip on her tray. She couldn't just be furniture today. She couldn't leave Rose in the sandbox. Anna stepped into the small private alcove, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew the protocol. Approach from the left, speak to the host, David, first, and remain unobtrusive. But the image of Rose's resigned face, so similar to Ben's defeated expression in the sandbox, burned in her mind. It overrode the fear of Mr. Henderson, the fear of losing her job, and the fear of the imposing man in the suit. David sensed her presence before he saw her. He stopped typing mid-sentence, his patience snapping like a dry twig. He looked up, his eyes narrowing as he saw Anna standing there, not pouring water, not taking orders, just standing. "Well," he asked, his voice clipped and sharp, cutting to the ambient noise of the restaurant. He glanced pointedly at his watch. "We are in a rush. I've already ordered for her, so just bring the water and the wine list for me." He turned back to his screen, dismissing her. He expected her to pull out her pad. He expected the usual nervous stutter. The "yes, sir, right away, sir," followed by the hasty retreat of a servant who knew their place. He viewed the interaction as a transaction. He provided the money. She provided the invisibility. But silence, Anna knew, had different textures. There was a silence of submission, which David expected, and then there was a silence of connection, which Rose desperately needed. Instead of answering him, Anna took a deep breath, grounding herself in the plush carpet beneath her feet. She didn't reach for the water pitcher. She didn't look at David. For the first time since starting at the Grand, she broke the cardinal rule of service. She ignored the paying customer. She turned her body fully toward Rose. The older woman was staring at the tablecloth, tracing the pattern of the linen with a manicured fingernail, lost in her own quiet world. She didn't notice Anna until the waitress stepped directly into her line of sight. Rose looked up, her eyes guarded, expecting another person who would talk over her head or mouth words too fast catch. Anna locked eyes with her. She let a soft, genuine smile touch her lips, not the polite customer service smile she wore like a mask, but a real one, warm and open. Slowly, deliberately, Anna raised her hands. The movement felt electric. For 2 years, her hands had been heavy, burdened by grief and the mundane task of survival. But as she lifted them now, they felt weightless. Muscle memory, dormant since the day Ben died, surged back to life. Her fingers didn't shake. They found their rhythm instantly, recalling the shapes and flows that had once been her daily lullaby. With a fluidity that seemed to slow down time, she signed. One hand moved from her chin, bringing it down into her other hand. Good. The arm dipped, suggesting the sun crossing the sky. Afternoon. Rose's eyes widened, her gaze locking onto Anna's hands with sudden, intense focus. Anna didn't stop. She continued, her fingers dancing in the air, weaving the air into meaning. Would you like still or sparkling water? The gestures were crisp and clear, executed with a grace that belonged to a poet, not a waitress. In that moment, the clinking cutlery and the low hum of chatter faded away. There was only the movement of Anna's hands, cutting through the isolation that surrounded Rose, building a bridge out of thin air. It was a silent question, but it rang louder than any shout. Time seemed to stop. The clinking of silverware, the hum of conversations, and the distant clatter of the kitchen faded into a dull background buzz, irrelevant and far away. For the 3 people at table 9, the only thing that existed was a silent space between Anna's hands and Rose's eyes. Rose gasped, a sharp, audible intake of breath that sounded almost painful. Her hand flew to her mouth, covering trembling lips. She looked at Anna's hands, suspended in the air, then up at her face, her eyes wide with shock. It was the first time in years a stranger had spoken directly to her, in her own language. It wasn't the simplified, exaggerated mouthing of words she was used to, nor was a scribbled note on a napkin. It was her language, fluid, expressive, and human. Tears welled in Rose's eyes, spilling over her lashes and tracing lines down her powdered cheeks. For a moment, she seemed paralyzed by the sheer improbability of it. Then, slowly, instinctively, her hands lifted from her lap. They were shaking slightly with age, the skin thin and papery, but they moved with desperate purpose. "You know, sign," she signed back. Her movements were a little stiff from disuse, but the meaning was crystal clear. Anna felt a rush of warm flood her chest, melting the icy anxiety that had gripped her earlier. She softened her stance, letting her shoulders drop. "Yes," Anna signed, her smile widening into something radiant. She touched her chest, then moved her hands in a sign for brother, a gesture she hadn't used since the funeral. "My brother taught me. He was like you." At the other side of the table, the spell of business was broken. David had been in the middle of typing a furious email to his COO about a merger delay. He sensed a shift in the air, the sudden suspension of motion from his mother, the lack of the waitress retreating. He looked up, annoyed, ready to reprimand the girl for lingering. But the words died in his throat. His phone, forgotten, slipped from his hand and clattered onto the mahogany table. He didn't pick it up. He stared at his mother. Rose wasn't the fragile, confused woman he had been dragging around all day, the one he treated like a piece of delicate porcelain that needed to be packed away in cotton wool. She was bright, alert, and alive. Her back was straight. Her face, usually slack with the boredom of isolation, was animated. She was laughing, a silent, breathless laugh that shook her shoulders, while her hands flew in a rapid staccato of shapes and symbols. David looked at Anna. This invisible waitress, whose name he hadn't even bothered to check, was holding a conversation with his mother that he, with all his billions and resources, could not enter. He felt a sudden, piercing pang of shame. He had spent years hiring the best doctors, buying the best hearing aids, and taking her to the most expensive restaurants, thinking he was giving her the world. But he had never given her this. He had never given her a voice. He watched as Rose signed something eagerly, pointing to menu, and Anna nodded, signing back a description of the dish. It was a dance, intimate and profound. David sat back in his chair, his expensive suit feeling suddenly too tight, realizing that for the first time in a decade, he was the outsider at his own table. He wasn't the powerful billionaire anymore. He was just a spectator to a miracle he hadn't paid for. The transformation was immediate and total. What had begun as a rigid, silent business lunch dissolved into something warm and chaotic. For the next hour, Anna didn't just serve food. She facilitated a moment, weaving herself into the fabric of the meal in a way that staff members were explicitly trained not to do. But nobody stopped her. Even Mr. Henderson, watching from a maitre d' station, paused his frantic pacing, sensing that an interruption now would be a sacrilege. Anna didn't hand the wine list to David. Instead, she held the menu up for Rose, pointing to the items and signing their descriptions with flourish. She described the roasted chicken not just as food, but as a sensory experience, her hands miming the heat and the savory aroma. Rose, who usually picked at her food with indifference, watched with rapt attention, nodding and asking questions with her hands. Questions she had likely swallowed for years because it was too exhausted to ask them. When the appetizers arrived, delicate, artistic, and incredibly small portions of scallop on oversized ceramic plates, a look of confusion crossed Rose's face. She looked at the tiny morsel, then at the vast expanse of the plate. Anna caught her eye. Checking to make sure David wasn't looking, she winked at Rose. She raised her hands and signed. The chef charges extra for the empty space. It's imported air. Rose stared for a split second, processing the sign, and then she threw her head back. A sound erupted from her, a loud, joyous, uninhibited laugh that startled the diners at the adjacent tables. It wasn't the polite, muffled chuckle she used in public to be agreeable. It was a deep, belly-shaking sound, rusty from disuse but undeniably alive. David froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at his mother, his heart hammering against his ribs. He hadn't heard that sound, that specific, carefree peal of laughter, since his father died over a decade ago. It was a sound he thought had been buried in the cemetery, along with the man who used to provoke it. Hearing it now, triggered by a shy waitress in a hotel dining room, felt like seeing a ghost. He sat in silence, not out of the arrogance that usually defined his demeanor, but out of sheer awe. He looked at the scene before him. His mother, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes, signing back a retort to Anna, who was grinning broadly. David looked down at his expensive watch, his tailored suit, and the platinum credit card resting in his wallet. He had spent thousands of dollars on specialists, on the best hearing aids technology could produce, on front-row tickets to shows she couldn't hear, trying to buy her happiness. He thought he could solve her isolation with resources. But as he watched Anna pour more water, signing a "you're welcome" as she did, David realized the magnitude of his failure. He couldn't buy what Anna was giving for free. He had been treating his mother like a problem to be managed, a fragile object to be protected. Anna was treating her like a person. She gave his mother her dignity back. She made her an equal at the table, not a dependent. For the first time in 10 years, Rose wasn't the deaf woman or the billionaire's mother. She was just Rose, having lunch, laughing at a joke, fully present in the world. And David, the man who could build anything, realized he was the one who had been broken all along. As the meal wound down and the afternoon light began to stretch long, golden shadows across the table, the energy shifted from joyous to deeply sentimental. The plates had been cleared, leaving only the water glasses and the heavy silence of an impending goodbye. For Anna, the return to reality was looming. Soon, she would have to pick up her tray, retreat to the kitchen, and become invisible once again. But Rose wasn't ready to let the moment end. As Anna reached for the empty carafe, Rose reached out. She bypassed the formality of the setting and grabbed Anna's hand physically, her grip surprisingly strong. Her skin was warm and dry against Anna's palm. It was a grounding touch, tethering the two women together in a world that often tried to push them apart. Rose looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She let go of one hand to sign, her movements slow and deliberate, ensuring every gesture landed with the weight of a vow. "Thank you," she signed, touching her chin and moving her hand forward. Then she placed her hand over her heart, tapping it gently. "I felt lonely. For a long time, I have been in a room full of people, but by myself. Now, because of you, I feel seen." The honesty of the admission hit Anna harder than any reprimand from a manager ever could. A lump formed in her throat, thick and painful. She fought the urge to cry. knowing that staff were not supposed to weep in the dining room. But her professional mask had long since crumbled. She squeezed Rose's hand back, then raised her own trembling fingers. "I miss signing," Anna confessed, her sign small and intimate. "You remind me of my brother, Ben." She paused, her fingers hesitating for a fraction of a second before finishing the sentence she rarely spoke aloud. She pointed upward, a slow, somber gesture toward the sky. "He is in heaven now. Talking to you. It felt like talking to him one last time." David sat frozen. He didn't know sign language. The syntax of hand shapes and facial expressions was foreign to him. But he was a man who dealt in the currency of human behavior, and he understood the raw, unfiltered emotion etched onto their faces. He saw the grief in Anna's eyes. He saw the profound relief in his mother's posture. The realization washed over him like a cold wave, stripping away the armor of the ruthless businessman. He stood up abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping against marble floor. The noise was harsh, but he didn't seem to notice. He wasn't the billionaire titan of industry in that moment. He was just a son who realized he had failed the person he loved most. He looked at Anna, really looked at her, seeing not a waitress, but a woman who had carried a burden as heavy as his own. I didn't know," David stammered, his voice cracking. The polished baritone he used in boardrooms was gone, replaced by a tone of quiet devastation. He looked down at his mother, who was still holding Anna's hand. "I thought I was protecting her," he admitted, the words tumbling out as he looked back at Anna. "I thought that by speaking for her, I was saving her from embarrassment. I thought I was being a shield." He took a shaky breath, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. "But you showed me I wasn't protecting her. I was silencing her. I was the one making her invisible." 2 weeks later, the atmosphere of the Grand Hotel was thick, with a different kind of tension. A mandatory all-staff meeting had been called for 10 a.m. in the main ballroom, a rare occurrence that usually signaled layoffs or management changes. The staff, from the head chefs to the housekeepers, gathered in their uniforms, murmuring nervously. Anna stood near the back, twisted her hands together, wondering if she had overstepped her bounds that day at table 9. But when the doors opened, it wasn't a corporate hatchet man who walked onto the stage. It was David Cole. He looked different. The severe armor-like suit was replaced by a softer charcoal blazer, and his posture, usually rigid with authority, seemed more open. Beside him stood Mr. Henderson, who looked uncharacteristically humble. David stepped to the microphone. The room went dead silent. 2 weeks ago," David began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room, "I came here for lunch and realized that despite all my success, I was failing at the most basic human skill, connection." He scanned the crowd until his eyes found Anna in the back. He didn't point her out, but he held her gaze. "I learned that service isn't just about efficiency. It's about empathy." He announced that he was not there to complain, but to invest. He was establishing a new program at the Grand Hotel, funded entirely by his private estate. "I am calling it the Ben Initiative," David said. Anna's breath hitched. The sound of her brother's name, spoken in this room of crystal and gold, felt surreal. "This initiative," David continued, "will provide mandatory, paid sign language training for every staff member at this hotel. We will ensure that no guest and no employee ever feels isolated within these walls again." A ripple of shock, then applause, moved through the room. But David raised a hand to quiet them. "There is one more thing." He beckoned Anna to come to the stage. Her legs felt like jelly as she walked up the aisle, the eyes of her co-workers on her. When she reached the podium, David didn't shake her hand like a boss. He offered her a thick, cream-colored envelope with both hands, a gesture of respect. "Anna," he said softly, so only she in the front row could hear, "you have a gift. You shouldn't be carrying trays. You should be building bridges." Anna opened the envelope. Inside was a letter of acceptance and a full-ride scholarship to the State University's prestigious Department of Special Education and Deaf Studies, along with a stipend for living expenses. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. David smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "The world has enough businessmen," he told her, his voice firm with conviction. "We need more people who know how to break the silence." The meeting dispersed into a celebration, but Anna slipped away to the large bay window overlooking the city. The afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a warm, golden glow over the streets where she had once felt so invisible. She pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the warmth. She thought of the quiet room in the back of her old apartment. She thought of the little boy who had taught her to listen with her eyes. Slowly, she raised her hand to the light. With a smile that finally reached her soul, she signed a small, simple thank you to the sky, knowing that somewhere in the quiet, Ben was smiling back. Anna continued to visit Rose, and they became close friends. The story of the shy waitress and the billionaire's mother spread, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for another human being is to simply understand and communicate with them. All right, Bestie, that brings us to the end of this episode on Folktale Bestie. Please do tell us your thoughts in the comments, as we are reading and responding to every single one of them. Till next time, stay blessed and stay my bestie.